Welcome to Let's Talk Kashrus. We are joined today by Rabbi Moshe Elephant, Chief Operating Officer of OU Kosher. Thank you, Rabbi Elephant, for your time.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. So we'd like to discuss two very relevant questions. Number one, someone goes to the grocery, the supermarket, and they see an item on the shelf that says DE, dairy equipment, and they don't know what it means. Does it mean that there's milk in the item? They look on the ingredient panel, they don't see milk. So if there's no milk, could they eat that item together with a meat meal? What does DE mean? Is it like an allergen statement? Well, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times.
For sure we've been asked many times. In fact, we at the OU have a hotline. We have a Rav whose full-time position is to answer questions from the public. And the most popular question we get is, are Oreo cookies, they have an OUD on them, are they D or DE? Okay. We get that question approximately 300 times a week. We're not sure it's not the same person asking it 300 times, but we get that question about 300 times a week. And what is the issue? The issue is does it really have anything dairy in it? Or is it just made on equipment that are used for dairy and haven't been kashered? The example I always give when I speak about the subject, if somebody is eating meatballs for dinner, and your wife cooked spaghetti, and she cooked spaghetti in a milchige pot, in a clean dairy pot, are you allowed to eat that spaghetti with the meatballs? The answer is no. Do you have to wait 6 hours after you eat the meatballs to eat the spaghetti? The answer is also no, because it wasn't made with dairy, it was made in dairy equipment. And since it was made in dairy equipment, it may not be eaten with meat, but it may be eaten immediately after meat. Now, the issue is as follows. There are many products that may be OUDE, but companies don't want to list DE. The example I started with, Oreo cookies. So the plain Oreo cookies are OUDE. If you look at the product, they're OUD. Because the manufacturers of Oreo cookies have told us maybe down the line we're going to want to revert back to using real dairy in the product. And then we'll have labels with DE.
Is this a recent development? Because we do remember it was not that long ago that items did have DE.
There are Oreo cookies never had the DE.
Not Oreos. Okay.
In fact, what's recent is that the OU started using the DE. Mm-hmm. For years, the OU only had OU or OU Parav, which means Parav, OUD, which included both D and DE. Mm-hmm. Now we had Pesach and meat, etc. More and more consumers were anxious to know, is the product truly D or DE? And what was happening, unfortunately, is that consumers were making their own decisions. And the product had an OUD on it, but they looked at the ingredient panel and they said, well, there's nothing dairy here, it must be DE. Mm-hmm. And most consumers are not sophisticated enough to understand an ingredient panel. So even though it might have been really milchigs, they thought it was not. Mm-hmm. So we now began using the DE designation. It's not a simple designation because as we just discussed, you need to know the halachic ramifications of that designation. And the second and more important issue from where we come is that although the equipment the product might not have anything dairy in it, the equipment has to be perfectly clean. Going back to my spaghetti example, the spaghetti could be eaten after meat if your pot is a clean pot. Right. But if your pot is not a clean pot, then you can't eat the spaghetti. So our mashgichim were concerned if equipment was being used for dairy, is it properly clean that it should get the DE designation? But more and more consumers, and frankly some companies, we have 3 types of companies. There's some companies that say, well, we're DE and we want to be listed as DE. Some companies, I would say probably most of the companies, they don't know the difference.
Right.
Non-Jewish companies. And then the third group of companies are companies that don't want to have the DE. They're saying to us, it's not clear, and we don't want to start something confusion, but consumers are calling us, and we give them the information online, we give them the information on phone.
Mm-hmm.
The issue with that is, of course, you always have to keep on checking.
Right.
So that's why we have the same people calling about the Oreo cookies, just because last week it was DE, is a DE this week.
Right.
But that's the long and short story of DE, and it's a very important designation as more and more people want to be able to use these products after Fleischiks and not wait for 6 hours.
Now, you mentioned the hotline that people
Right.
do call. Could you share that with our
Sure,
viewers?
the number is 212-563-4000 or 212-613-8241. And all year round, we have one rabbi whose job is just to answer questions all day. And then as we get closer to Pesach, which is the season when people ask questions, we increase our staff, we increase our hours. And it's incredible how, I guess this is the subject of your program, how people are so interested in kashrus and people want to do what's right, and we want to help them do so.
And we're blessed to have people like you and other Abonim of the OU making yourselves available to educate us. So
Well, maybe the other Rabbanim.